Japan will soon start building the world's first Zeta-class supercomputer, and it's going to be 1,000 times more powerful than the fastest supercomputer on the planet today. It's going to cost $750 million to build, starting in 2025 and running out to 2030. This is an extremely ambitious piece of technological engineering because a Zeta-class computer is one that can hit a zettaflop of data. The most powerful supercomputer in the world right now is the exascale machine Frontier at Oak Ridge National Laboratory that can do 1.2 exaflops. Now, to get to a zettaflop, you need 1,000 exaflops. So the computer that they're trying to build is 1,000 times more powerful than the world's fastest supercomputer currently. And since it's Japan, you already saw the other image, they're probably going to use it on anime waifus. Like, can we be real here? They're designing this to give Japan an edge in AI and artificial intelligence based technologies and services to catch up with the rest of the world. And I know exactly what they're going to end up doing with this technology. And it's this right here. You're going to be able to take your waifu home with you. Now, this project is so ridiculous and so ambitious that it's scheduled to require as much power, if I can find it here, the output of 21 nuclear power plants to run one computer. So we're going to have 21 of these, not the individual towers, these are just cooling towers, but 21 plants like this, all powering the exaflop PC so that we can have our anime waifu girlfriends at home. And I think this is awesome. I think it's extremely ambitious. Nobody on planet Earth is trying to build a Zeta-class computer right now. And if they are, they're in an earlier planning phase than Japan. So it's very likely that in 2030, or, because of bureaucracy, 2031 or 2, Japan is going to be the first country on the planet to have an exaflop computer literally doing 1,000 times the work of our best PC here in the United States. And that's extremely, extremely impressive. It's also going to be extremely, extremely polluting and probably misused because, it's made by humans, but it's a very interesting story nonetheless. NASA has discovered an enormous hidden ocean underneath the surface of Mars, so big that it could contain life if Mars ever had life to begin with. So the story behind this is that scientists are examining data from NASA's InSight lander, and they've revealed the likely presence of an underground reservoir containing enough liquid to cover the entire planet with a mile of water. That is an absolutely outrageously massive reservoir, probably much bigger than reservoirs that we have here on Earth. Of course, we have the standard picture of Mars, and these are geophysicists saying that there's a gigantic hidden ocean beneath Mars's surface, big enough where it could harbor life. So the massive underground reservoir was discovered using seismic data from the InSight lander. And they said that it's trapped inside a layer of fractured rock about 7 to 13 miles, which is up to 20 kilometers, beneath the red planet's crust. That's so deep that it's sort of beyond our current drilling capabilities, but I think it would be really awesome if we discover aliens and they're underwater aliens. That would be really fun. It might even be grays underwater. Maybe that's where they're hiding. Maybe that's why they look so different, why they don't necessarily have to blink. I'm being silly. It's unlikely to be that. We'd more likely find microscopic or very simple life underneath the water. But it's important to note that even on Earth, we cannot drill 13 miles into the rock. So doing so on Mars is just beyond human beings' technological capacity at the moment. And it will be a very long time before we see if any of this comes to fruition. According to this article from TechSpot, despite having a tech-savvy reputation, Gen Z falls woefully behind in keyboard typing skills, and of all things, they use an image of an old-timey typewriter to reference this key essential skill that Zoomers are apparently shockingly bad at. And there is some truth to this article, but some of it is also very silly and just sort of ageist or intergenerational nonsense. Gen Z are indeed digital natives. They grew up glued to screens. They had tablets and phones and devices way earlier than any other generation, even more so than older millennials like myself. But the US Department of Education shows that in the year 2000, 44% of high school graduates took a keyboarding course, but by 2019, and it's even worse now, that has dropped down to just 2.5%. And the original assumption was that Gen Z was so good at typing that this just wasn't necessary. But the reality is actually the opposite. Gen Z is underperforming their peers in keyboarding and typing skills. And most importantly, they can't feel the keyboard a number, have to look and peck at the keys. And this is where I'm kind of leaving the article to say that this is just intergenerational nonsense. So my dad was a typewriter salesman in the 2000s. So in the 2000s, when we had computers like this, I would spend a fair bit of my time after school helping repair, sell, package, lift, move these typewriters around so that my dad could sell it to banks that had older employees that basically refused to use new technologies. So I have a bit of experience with this and obviously typing in general. But as a generation from mine to Generation Z, I prefer to do most of my work on the big computer. I like to have a big honkin' desktop PC that I can come sit down at and use my keyboard and my gaming mouse and my multiple monitors. And this is like really where I do my work and I do my big purchases. But that's just a personal preference because it's something that I'm comfortable with. Now, this article does have it right that many students have embraced tablets and mobile devices over physical keyboards. And a number of students are actually writing whole essays, autobiographies. I've known young people that wrote whole books just typing on their phone because that's their preferred input method. They're often a lot more forgiving, a lot faster in certain circumstances. You don't even have to spell everything right. The phone will do that for you. There is a downside, though, that states often require standardized tests to be computer-based, like, big PC. So students who only use cell phones actually score a little bit worse than those with computer experience because they have to take a little bit of time to look down at the keyboard that they're unfamiliar with. So I don't think there's anything wrong with Gen Z. I don't think there's anything wrong with doing the majority of your work on your phone. It's just what you're used to. It's an age, class, generation thing. I'm used to the big PC. I'm a big PC guy. I'll probably be on the big PC till I die, and that's okay. And it's also okay if you want to be on mobile. There's a fascinating but controversial plan to turn one of the world's largest deserts into a lush green forest. We're talking about the Sinai Peninsula, which is a triangle-shaped desert in Egypt. It currently looks mostly like this, barren and dry, but you might notice some striations there because this was once an area of green, lush land and was only relatively recently turned into a desert on geologic timescales. And there is a Dutch geoengineer who believes that he can restore the desert from this state into this state at a relatively sane cost. And he believes that because it wouldn't be the first time this was done. In China, there was an issue with an area the size of California that had been heavily degraded by years of overuse and overgrazing, which is exactly what happened over here, but maybe like thousands of years ago. And it eventually ended up with sparse vegetation covered in thin, yellow soil. It was prone to erosion, but the Chinese government, partnering with the World Bank, launched this massive program in the 90s to plant trees and shrubs and grazing bands and all this stuff. And it's known as the Loess Plateau. You can see how it looked here in 1993 and then how it looks today. It's hardly perfect. It's hardly a lush jungle now, but it's radically restored. There's trees, there's life, there's plants. You can see the lack of yellow soil. You can see the lack of erosion going on. It looks less like a desert and more just like a temperate area. So the engineer kind of got that plan to do the same thing for the Sinai Desert. And this is a little complicated to explain. I'm actually support this idea. Normally I wouldn't. Normally I'm very against big geoengineering projects because our environment is a complex beast that we don't necessarily understand that well. And small changes can have large unintended consequences, but our planet is roasting. Global warming has been turbocharged. I just saw an article today that the Great Barrier Reef is already set to die no matter what we do. So we got to do something. So large-scale geoengineering to get a heat sink that sucks in heat and provides us some kind of benefit in more farmland has to be better than just letting it turn into more deserts, right? But to go back to the details of the plan, the key way that the individual wants to do this is he wants to pump water from a nearby lake into the old rivers that used to exist in this area, use sediment from the lake to resoil and resod, reintroduce plant life, reintroduce native plants, native trees, native shrubs, native bushes, stop the erosion. He wants to do cloud seeding for rain and weather and get native life back, like an actual ecosystem of animals and not just plants. and spread around fertile soil from the lake everywhere. And ideally, in as little than 30 as I say as little as 30 years, we can turn this desert back into some Greenland, which would be very interesting because this was the land of milk and honey from the Bible. We just over farmed it until it's desert now. Probably an analogy there and a scary one. I've grossly summarized this article. This is actually a very long article. I'd encourage you to check it out. And in previous videos, again, I have been very against geoengineering due to the unintended consequences, but our planet is so far gone now, I feel that the rewards outweigh the risks in this case.